All right, welcome to, I don't even have a name for this. I'm the carnivore teacher and I am doing live interviews. Actually, they're recorded, but they're going to be 50-minute interviews where people can tell their carnivore story. And my very first episode is this one. So I'm going to call it episode 1 with Rick, the 41-year carnivore. And that's kind of what I titled it, the 41-year carnivore. So Rick, we'll start out with, can you introduce yourself and share a bit about your life before starting the carnivore diet?
Well, I'm sure that a lot of people have seen my story before, but if you haven't seen it before, I am the most unique carnivore in the entire carnivore space. I'm Rick, and I started the carnivore diet in 1983. I started the diet because I was a frustrated, skinny, and short kid, and I just kind of hated my life. I mean, I didn't hate it. I liked the life I had at home, but when I went to school, it was just constantly being picked on and bothered. And school was boring anyway. It was one of the least places I wanted to go to. And so I was just a very frustrated kid. And then to make matters worse, I broke my arm when I was trying to help my dad build a carport. So about a week or so before school, I not only was I the ugly duckling, but I was also the injured bird with a broken wing. So you can only imagine. Actually, I think it was a couple of weeks. I don't remember the exact time. But then, my mother was taking classes for her teaching certificate. And well, I was kind of stuck by myself. And, my dad was doing some work too during the week. So I started the carnivore diet basically for that reason. But my life before carnivore was pretty much like any other kid, I guess. Any kid that was picked on. I had a few friends, but not a lot of them. And it was basically school. And I always look forward to the summer because that's when I enjoyed my life the most. But again, summer of 1983, I had a broken arm and I was just not a very happy child. So that's kind of what my life was before the carnivore diet.
Okay, thank you. That sets this up. It's very different and unique because you started so long ago. 1983, you said, right? Wow.
Yes.
That is a long time ago. Have you noticed changes in your mental health focus or energy levels? If you can think way back to 82 and beyond to when you
Oh,
transitioned, tell me what changed.
I can think back because it was so frustrating, and I still remember how bad I felt because practically every other boy my age was bigger than me, more mature than me. Most of them were growing facial hair by that, and they had, a real body, unlike me, the toothpick. And I just, it's, you know, it was really it was kind of an emotional experience because before I was a carnivore, I used to get frustrated easy. I had a bad temper and I would blow up. And then sometimes I would be just crying because I didn't know what to do. And if I tried to get somebody to help me, it never happened. And it just seemed like, and my family wasn't really that poor, but we were kind of poor. So I never really got to get the things that other kids had. But when I went on the carnivore diet, it was kind of interesting because you know how it is when you're trying to preserve yourself, you tend to be more cautious and you tend to avoid conflict. But when you don't care, you just you've kind of lost it. You say, you know what, I don't care. I hope that I get mad and I drop and get a heart attack right here in school, because my motivation is that if I had a heart attack or some kind of medical condition, they would send me home. Now, when I was in elementary school and even sometimes in junior high, when I didn't like school, I would make myself sick. I would, try to stick my finger in my mouth to throw up, or I would eat something really disgusting to get sick, like insects, or eat out of the garbage and then throw up, and I'd catch a cold. I tried everything to get sick. When I was in elementary school, I was so happy to get chicken pox because that meant I didn't have to go to school for more than a week. So, but once I was on the carnivore diet, it didn't take that long, really, because when I started high school, I was like a couple of weeks late because of the broken arm thing. And I had to make up some of the work that had already been done. And it just seemed like my ability to study increased. Now, I get very bored very quickly when I'm not doing anything. And to this day, if I go to, let's say, a lecture where the person is boring, or I'm dealing with a government agency and I can't really get anything done and I'm sitting still, I will start to fall asleep. But in school, it was really bad because not only would I fall asleep, but I would also zone out. I'd be in the classroom listening to the teacher or whatever and just zone out. I'm thinking about something else. I'm looking out the window. Thinking about ducks. It could be anything. But once I got really into the carnivore diet, I just I seem to think clearer. And then the other thing too is that usually at lunchtime, well, obviously when I went to school, before I went to school, before carnivore, I'd have oatmeal, maybe an egg or two if I was lucky, and a piece of fruit. Well, you know where the oatmeal went. It usually went out the window for the ducks. So I didn't have a big breakfast. I had eggs or egg, maybe a piece of fruit. Then I'm just dying for lunch, 11:30, 12, whatever. It's just like I'm watching the clock. And when we were in school, we had these clocks like I have in my house. Every minute they go click, click, and it's just like torture because I'm waiting. Oh my goodness. But once I had eaten a carnivore breakfast and I went to school, I mean, yeah, I look forward to lunch, but it wasn't like so slow. It just seemed like the lunch came, and then the good part was I got to go to the cafeteria with my plastic container or later on my can full of homemade beef, ground beef stew or ground beef chili that I made. There could be some, cold chicken. I mean, there was always some type of meat that was in that box because I packed it myself. And it was usually, a plastic box or it would be just a bag. Sometimes I had a paper bag with a plastic bag in it and had the food in it. And yeah, as the year went on, at the beginning of the year, I did have a couple of people picking on me. I had one bully that I had from junior high, and it was a bit of a nuisance. But somewhere around the middle of the year, it was, if I remember correctly, it was around maybe February, somewhere, remember this time, maybe a little bit later. I finally had enough and I got thrown out of the cafeteria. Actually, there's a couple reasons I got thrown out. First of all, I would bring in all kinds of meats in the cafeteria, and then I used to use a knife and fork. Well, they didn't like my steel steak knives. They thought that was dangerous, so I couldn't bring that. Then they wouldn't let me bring the fork. So you had to use a stupid plastic spork thing, and the first time that you touch it, it would break in half. I don't think it would break. So then I started eating with my hands, and they're complaining about that because there's grease everywhere. And that's actually where I started my caveman carnivore eating style. Because when I'm working or when I'm somewhere, it's just too much trouble to have to worry about the knife and the fork and the plate and all that. So I would just put a piece of meat inside some plastic or aluminum foil and just eat it right there in the cafeteria and then throw it out, the plastic or foil or whatever. But yeah, eventually, about that time, maybe February, I had one of the bullies bother me in the cafeteria, and I lost it. I knocked him in the head and knocked him to the ground of the school, and that was it. No more Rick in the cafeteria. So from then on, I had to eat outside. And in our school, there was actually a double doors that nobody used next to the teacher's lounge. And they had steps. And then there was like a concrete table that was pretty much abandoned that nobody even used. So I'd go out there and eat. I was also taking electronics class. And electronics was a hobby of mine. And the teacher I had was kind of boring. But I was able to pay attention. And, by the second grade term, I had straight A's. Now, I was a C student for most of my life, although in ninth grade I did get to a B average. But for the first time in my life in high school in 10th grade, I had straight A's, absolutely straight A's. And if I remember correctly, I had just the algebra class, the biology class, and I had history or social studies or whatever that silly class was. And then I had physical education, which, by the way, was sort of like the remedial one because since my arm was broken, I didn't have to go to the regular one, so that was a good thing. And then English class, and I'll tell you, my ability to learn went up. My ability to pay attention went up, and I could participate in class in a meaningful way instead of just being sort of the class clown. And then, yeah, I mean, I was kicked out of the cafeteria, but then my electronics teacher, he let me eat in the classroom. So, because the electronics class was just before lunch. So he said, well, don't bother with the cafeteria. You can eat here, no problem. So that got rid of that stress point. And I would say by the end of 10th grade, I didn't have problems with anybody. Nobody picked on me. Now, there was another kid that picked on me, and he did it in the bathroom, and I hit him with my bundle of books because I didn't have a locker. And I had the thing with a cargo strap on it, and I hit him so hard that he hit the back of the wall and hit his head on the toilet. And,
Wow.
so I figured he was going to get his friends and beat me up. But the good thing was the next time I saw him, he walked right by me, didn't even look at me.
Wow.
And this kid used to bother me all the time. So he just walked down the hall, and that was it. But then by 11th grade, I started getting taller, and I didn't really realize it, but I was about average height by the time I started 11th grade. So I used to be the shortest kid in high school. I was average, so I could look down the hallway and I could see people coming. And 11th grade was pretty much uneventful, straight A's. You know, I liked it. I used to hate school intensely, but by the time I got to 11th grade, I didn't mind it at all. It was actually kind of fun. And I didn't have to take physical education either, which was another benefit because I hated that class more than any. Living in South Florida, it's extremely hot and it's just not a pleasant experience. And I'm not going in that nasty shower that they have. So instead of that, then I had electronics 2, which was 2 hours, and that took over that stupid physical education. And then in 12th grade, electronics 3 was 3 hours. So I spent most of my classroom days between lunch and electronics, which we also ate a lunch, same thing in the electronics room. So in 11th and 12th grade, we ate lunch in the electronics room. So going to school went from being a zoo to being almost like having a job in a way, because it was like you go there, you go from one classroom to the other, you do the work, and you complete the task. You may have to take some home with you, but it was like a whole different experience. So I went from being one of the lower end students to one of the best. And that's the other reason why I got a scholarship when I went to college. Because again, and I don't know if it was the carnivore diet or the fact that I grew taller or just a different life experience, but my whole attitude changed. I went from being sort of a frustrated kid that tried to fit in and never could, to a younger, an older kid, young adult, who decided that I would do my own thing and I would accept the consequences. If it worked, great. That's great. If it failed, it failed. A lot of things did fail, but then a lot more things succeeded. And as time went on, the failures became less and the success became more. So, but again, I don't know if that's the carnivore diet by itself, but it had to be part of it, because how I got so tall, I don't know. No one in my family is this tall.
Hmm.
My mother was very smart. She was a teacher, so I could have gotten some of that from her. She was very good at teaching me things when I was younger. She taught me arithmetic and reading and all that. That and watching Sesame Street. But when I got older, it just seemed like I went from being dependent, like on my parents whenever there was a problem, to doing things on my own. So again, I don't know if it's a carnivore diet, but it had to be part of it.
Wow. And you graduated in
86,
86.
1986.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So I graduated in 83. So as you were speaking, I was going through my head too, thinking, and I took electronics too in
Really?
10th, 11th, and 12th grade. When we went to tech school for for half the year, and the other half we were in regular school. So when I was in tech school, it was electronics all day. And then the other half of the year we were in, I took all my regular classes. So it was different, but very, very interesting that we had, and I had a lot of bullies that beat up on me too. But I wish I had done what you did and hit the bullies and fought back to send that message. But you did it out of anger and rage, which actually worked for you. Now, my next question is, I'm skipping a couple of questions that I have because you kind of answered them as you were talking. And it's just amazing the benefits, your mental focus, so many other things that happened as you transitioned to carnivore. You got taller. You started, it sounds like emotionally, you started being happier as well. So what does a typical day of eating look like for you now? I know you've probably evolved from then, but today in 2025, I'm sure it's a little different from most people. Describe your typical eating day.
Well, I'm one of the rare carnivores that eat 3 times a day. I like having my 3 meals a day. And usually it starts with a pound of some kind of meat and a quantity of eggs. Now, I used to eat a dozen eggs a day. Then I cut down to 6 eggs a day,
Mhm.
then down to 4 eggs a day and 3 eggs because eggs have gotten so expensive.
They have.
When I had ducks around, they provided me delicious free range eggs. Now my ducks have disappeared, so I have to rely on the crap eggs from the store. So right now, what I had for breakfast today, I had 3 eggs and I had a pound of pork chops. And then, let's see, what else did I have? I had some yogurt to go with it, and that was my breakfast. Then for lunch, I had 2 pounds of ground beef along with some cheese. And for dinner, I have some steaks in there that I got cheap, so I'll probably have a couple of pounds of steak, and then along with that, I'll probably have some yogurt, and that's about it. Now, like I said in the past, I've eaten a lot more, but this is sort of a reduction, to try to make up for the expensive food. But when chicken was on sale, which it hasn't been lately, I guess because of the so-called bird flu,
Mhm.
I was eating 3 to 4 pounds of chicken legs or thighs for lunch, and I cooked it heart attack style, which is deep fried in beef tallow or lard. So in a day, I eat a tremendous amount of fat, and I eat meat. And I estimated anywhere from 3 to 6,000 calories, so-called calories, per day. And that's pretty much what I eat.
Okay. Um, that's what you eat in a day. Now, if you had your druthers, if you had the money, if you had the availability, what would be your favorite meals or go-to cuts of meat?
Oh,
If
I'd
it,
have T-bone steaks and ribeyes all the time.
okay.
Because I've had actually times when the meat was super cheap and I had a lot of money,
Uh-huh.
and I would buy what's called a chuck roll.
Hmm.
It's a large piece of meat. And then what I would do is just cut pieces of it and cook steaks. And I like to eat 2 pounds of meat at every meal. So if I had what I wanted, I'd have a dozen eggs and a pound of meat for breakfast. And I'd have anywhere from 2 to 3 pounds for lunch and dinner. That would be my ideal diet.
Okay. You also talked in the past that you don't use butter like a lot of the carnivores do, or as much butter. You use more beef tallow, am I correct? And maybe
I,
pork
I
fat,
used to use I used to use
lard.
butter quite a bit, but the problem is again in the last few years butter has gone up in price to
Hmm.
the extreme. So I haven't bought butter in at least 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Now in the past I would cook my eggs in butter, but the problem is butter is not a very good frying fat because butter will actually burn. So I like to collect the beef fat and make beef tallow because it's easier to throw a piece of that in there, turn on the cast iron pan, and then get it melted. And if you've ever seen me cook, I'm not skimpy with the beef tallow. I put a lot of it in there. So my eggs are going to be swimming in that stuff. And again, it's just a lot more convenient because I can make up the beef tallow and then I can just cut pieces of it and throw it in there and cook it up. Beef tallow also is good for deep frying. So if you want to cook chicken or duck or iguana or whatever, then it's ready to go and it's easy.
I agree. I do. And I also, when we talked, I rub it on my head. My go-to.
Well,
And and I bought beef tallow soap because I don't know how to make the soap. So I know it's great for a lot of uses.
I make my own soap. In fact, I just took a shower about half an hour ago, and if you look at my hair, you'll see it's wet, but it's also full of tallow and lard from the soap that I make.
So is
Because the
this.
soap, yeah, see,
Yeah.
and my skin, everything, I'm always covered with animal fats, and because of the fact that I eat with my hands, I don't use a knife and fork. When I have a steak or burger,
Rub
my
it on.
whole hands and face are covered in beef fat. So it's something that's always been the case, which is probably why I haven't been sunburned since I was a teenager. The last time I got sunburned was 1983.
That
So,
says something right there about, because you're using the beef tallow, you're probably not eating all that, seed oil, standard American diet food that everybody else was eating.
mhm.
All right, here's a question that I know you're going to answer very differently from any of my future guests because you're just a very unique guest. Do you include fasting, exercise, or other lifestyle practices alongside your carnivore diet?
Well, okay, fasting is a no-no for me. I like to eat 3 times a day. I have no reason unless I'm so poor that I have to starve or I can't make a meal. I have had times where my meat fell on the road when I was trying to cook it
Oh,
and I wasn't able to eat. I mean, if you put the meat on the engine, always put extra fastening. If you don't use enough coat hangers and you go down a rough road, you could lose your meat. And
Okay.
next thing you know, it'll be a possum or some other animal that's eating it and not you. But no, I don't do fasting. I don't believe in fasting. I think it's ridiculous when you're as skinny as I am. That's the last thing you want to do.
That's good
But
for your individual. Everybody's different.
right, everybody's different. But, when it comes to other aspects of eating, you're saying what else besides fasting did you mention?
Um, Exercise or other lifestyle
Okay.
practices.
All right. This exercise, I think, is extremely important. Now, I don't do structured exercise at the moment. I've tried it before, but I had very limited results, weight training and all that. But I do work physically. Like today, I was cleaning out an apartment and I had to go up and down the stairs and the elevator with furniture and with all kinds of contents. I had to load it in my van. I brought it here, dumped it out, got more. I had to make 3 trips. Then when I got home, I had to go through all that stuff, put the scrap in one pile, the trash in the other. And I lifted up appliances. So I do a lot of physical work. Now, when it comes to cardio, that's, I guess, part of it.
It
And
is.
I also ride my bicycle because I drive a Ford, and Ford is fixed or repaired daily. So my truck has been broken since November. I'm using my van, which is okay, but it's not great. So all my short trips I make on a bicycle. So I do a lot of cycling. I probably average 4 miles a day on the bicycle because of the short trips. And it's actually easier because when your transmission is going bad, the last thing you want to do is drive around these short trips, going around the parking lot, back and forth. It's really hard on the transmission. A straight shot to the job and back is okay. So I do that, but I don't do any other exercise. Now, lifestyle, I like to go outside a lot. I do go barefoot a lot. I'm barefoot right now. I walk on concrete. I walk on the ground, and I live in a very old house. There's no modern chemicals here. Everything here is just cotton, wood, metal springs. It's just a really old fashioned house. The windows are usually open when I'm not here, and I close them when I turn the air conditioner on. So I try to avoid being indoors all the time. So that's basically my lifestyle.
Okay. Changing gears a little bit. When you did this in 1983, how did your family, friends, react to your decision to go carnivore? I'm sure they noticed that you changed what you were eating. Did you tell them you wanted a heart attack?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
Um, my dad, see, another reason I started this diet is because my dad was very, very health conscious, and he believed very strongly in eating vegetables and fruits.
Mhm.
And he also believed in soy and tofu and seaweed
Mm.
and whole wheat and whole grains. And he believed the bread was the staff of life and all these things, the oatmeal, all that nasty stuff. And as a kid, I was given the granola bars and the whole wheat bread and the peanut butter and all that stuff. So I rebelled. And what I did, I told my parents, I'm tired of this. I don't care. It's not working. The only thing that they gave me that I actually liked was cod liver oil. So I continue to take that.
Hmm.
And I always like seafood and stuff like that. But you see, when we were little, my parents were not extremely poor, but we were lower middle class. When we ate out, normally we didn't go to some sit down order restaurant. We went to a buffet or smorgasbord. And the one we went to the most was called the Sweden House Smorgasbord. Now, they went out of business in the early 80s. There was also another one. There was a painted horse, dollar horse, and there was a Chinese buffet. So even as a kid, when you go to a buffet, you can pick whatever you want. And they would try to encourage me to eat the salad, which I'd always pick some salad, but then I would try to stick it somewhere they couldn't find it because I didn't want to eat it. Sometimes what I would do, I'd take my plate back over there and dump it. They had like fake plants alongside. I'd dump it in there. I'd eat a little bit of it, but that was it. And I absolutely hated salad dressing because to me it looked like something vomit or something that came out of the rear end of a duck, and it smelled bad. It just couldn't take it. But my parents were very much against that. My mother didn't care because she said, "Well, he's young. Nothing that he does is going to hurt him. Let him do whatever he wants." Eventually, my dad said the same thing. You're young. It doesn't matter. You do whatever you want. And I remember the first time that I fried chicken in lard. That was in like 1984. We had an old deep fryer. It was one of those that it had the heating element inside so you could fry with the animal fats.
Hmm.
And I just remember how they used to say, I said, "You want a piece?" Like, "No, I can't eat that. That's going to give me a heart disease." I hear that all the time.
Right.
And see, between that and the Time magazine article that I saw over there at the Kmart, I came up with the heart attack diet. So I started calling it heart attack chicken, heart attack burger. Everything was heart attack because the idea was if you ate the diet that we called carnivore diet now, you were going to get a heart attack and your blood pressure was going to go up and you're just going to explode one day. So I figured I'd eat as many eggs as I can because
Wow.
they told you
Yeah.
one egg was like smoking 2 cigarettes or whatever it was. I've heard that. I didn't hear that actually till later, but they used to say like they had commercials. They had a product called No Yolks, and they always said it's like the eggs without the cholesterol. And then they always had, I can't believe it's not butter and all
Oh,
this
yeah.
other nonsense all the time. Snackwell's cookies that came later. Everything was no fat, low fat,
Right.
whatever. So I figured let me crank up the fat as much as I can. And I actually got the idea from cartoons because Tom and Jerry cartoons, Tom used to put lard on his hair. So that's why I started putting lard on my hair. And then they used to talk about deep fat frying. So I thought, what's the best way to be unhealthy? Fry everything in lard. And then later on, I discovered beef tallow, and I did it by accident because when I would make burgers or my mom would cook, they used to cook a dish called picadillo that was like Cuban food. And what they would do, they would take the ground beef and they would actually put it in a pan and then brown it. And they would pour out all the fat into a container to throw it away.
Hmm.
Well, I got a hold of some of that and I figured, well, let me see what I can do with it. I put it in the refrigerator and it separated out.
Right.
And then I realized the fat goes to the top. So I thought, I'm going to start collecting this stuff. And I collected a bunch of it. And then
Wow.
one day I tried to fry with it and it was absolutely wonderful. I fried fish with it. It was really good.
You're ahead of your
So
time. You were. Nobody did that back then. You did the exact opposite of what we were told to do.
yeah, and the thing is, I was always told things that didn't work. I always said if you work hard, you'll learn. If you eat like this, you'll be healthy. All the things that they told me just didn't work, and I was a really frustrated kid. I mean, it may seem silly, especially today where people are really small now, but when I was a kid, I hated being small, being short and skinny. It just I didn't understand it. Why was I being punished this way? Why was my life so lousy? And the other thing is, I tried to conform. I tried to fit whatever style was going on in the 80s. They had those stupid fashions, and, I tried my best. They had the big hair that stuck out. And when I went on the carnivore diet, I didn't care anymore. I said, if I had my way, I would have been grown up in the 1950s.
50s.
And they used to have that show Happy Days. And somebody joked and they said, "You look like Richie Cunningham." I thought, hey, that's a good idea. So I started the slick down hair, which I've had to this day, lard and tallow and all the old stuff. And my parents used to buy skim milk all the time, skim
No.
milk. I was like, don't give me that crap. I want whole milk, full fat. Then I learned how to make yogurt. I drank milk until I was 20. Then I stopped
Mhm.
drinking it because I figured, well, I'm already, I'm pretty much mature, 20, 21. I'm not going to drink milk anymore. And then I started making yogurt. But really, it came down to being different, thinking different, going against my parents. See, I rebelled in a way that wasn't like everybody else.
Right.
Some kids, they'd get into smoking and drinking and drugs and all that. And I thought that was stupid. I hate cigarettes. I think drinking is stupid. And, the rebellious things they did just seemed like they were self destructive. But the carnivore diet, the heart attack diet, that was a fun diet. And then the other thing, too, is that even though I'm super skinny, I was very strong. I was able to do things that other skinny kids couldn't do. So it was really kind of ironic that here I am trying to kill myself. And at the same time, I'm able to do things that I never knew that I could do. So even though my parents discouraged me, my friends didn't care. They thought, actually, a couple of my friends thought it was kind of neat, that I was doing that because it was different. I had one of my friends actually start eating more steaks
I
and
was going to
beef.
ask you, did any of your friends start doing what you were doing to rebel?
He did, yeah, because his parents, they weren't exactly health conscious, but they were into that whole grain crap
Hmm.
and low fat. So, because his dad did have a little trouble, he's putting on weight, and I guess he wanted to lose weight, and his blood pressure was high. But my friend, he says, "Oh, heck with it. I'm going to eat what Rick eats." And that was about the only one that did it. And as time went on, I didn't really see anybody imitate me.
Hmm.
But, at least back then, there was a lot of conflict. But the thing is, once I got out of high school, I went to college. Eventually, I lived on my own. There wasn't
Hmm.
anything anybody could really do about it. My parents just gave up. They said, "Forget it. He does whatever he wants. If it kills him, it kills him." And that's it. And I guess my dad said, "Well, at least he's not on drugs and he's not smoking and he's making his own life and that's good." So yeah, I think this was a positive,
Uh,
really.
Absolutely turned out that way, but back
Yeah.
then you were being a rebel and thinking you were going to go against the grain and give yourself a heart attack.
Yeah.
And far from it, the exact opposite of a heart attack. You're going to live longer than all of us. All right, here's a question that, again, will be different because you're different. But I know your answer because I know you. Have you found a supportive community for this way of eating?
Yes, but it didn't happen until 2022,
Hmm.
because actually I didn't know there was a carnivore community until like 2019,
Wow.
because when I was taking care of my mom, I was looking up to see, how I could make, like, I make my heart attack buns. I was trying to look up recipes for bread-like substances. My mom liked to eat regular foods, and I came across a guy called Butter Bob Briggs, and then eventually I stumbled onto Paul Saladino,
Hmm.
who at the time was pushing the carnivore diet.
Right.
I looked at this guy, I thought, little guy's in pretty good shape. And then eventually Sean Baker, and I started discovering, you know, it was like, okay. But then, after my mom died, we had the COVID thing. I was pretty much stuck at the computer. So in 2021, that's when I really took time to look around. I started seeing all these carnivore channels, and I discovered Anthony Chafee and, a couple other channels. And then 2022, I decided, I found this Joey Schwartz carnivore channel, and I commented a few times. And then when I commented that I've been a carnivore for 39 years, he wanted to interview me. And when he did interview me, I was the most popular interview he ever had. Almost 300,000 people watched that.
Wow.
It was crazy. It's a shame that he deleted his channel of his videos, but
Oh, he did?
you know.
Uh,
But then I started getting all these requests for interviews, and I was interviewed by several different carnivore YouTube channels, including Anthony Chafee and
mhm.
Sean Baker. And then it's just a matter of time before I started meeting other people. And then I stumbled onto the Homestead How channel and Kerry and his gang. I met with them. At that time, they were quite, quite new to the carnivore community. Of course, now I think it's a celebrity culture. But back then, I just met a bunch of people, and there's a few of them that I communicate to this day. But the thing is, it is a community, but I didn't need the community because I was already doing this long before anybody else was doing it. I mean, I predate even the most prominent carnivores.
True. Very true. We could say you started the community. We could say it that
Maybe.
way. Yeah. What is the biggest lesson you've learned since starting this in 1983? The biggest lesson?
Um, hmm.
I know it's hard because you're not like somebody who started 2 years ago, 6 months ago, 23 months ago. You've got to think way back.
Well, the thing is, the carnivore lifestyle, the heart attack lifestyle, in my opinion, is don't listen to the mainstream narrative because they're usually wrong. When they tell you something that's absolute, it's never absolute. There's always a little nuance to it. There's exceptions to every rule. And I've learned this from gardening. I've learned this from experimentation, energy, and so on, which is one of the main reasons I got on YouTube in the first place. A lot of the things they tell you just aren't true.
Hmm.
And the other thing I learned is when somebody gives you advice, you need to know where they're coming from. What is their motive?
Right.
Are they trying to profit off of you? Or are they basically just sharing out of the goodness of their heart? And most of the time, people go out there because they're looking for something. They're looking for some kind of compensation. That's right. They're either trying to validate themselves, like these alpha personalities that need all the other people to look up to them, or they're just trying to profit from it. And you see this a lot. And that's something I've learned because being on the carnivore diet, you're going against everything that they tell you. And it doesn't kill you. You keep going. It's like, and this is what happened to me a few years ago. I was over 50. I was waiting for that heart attack. It was supposed to get me. Meanwhile, all my other friends, they're the ones with high blood pressure. They're the ones on medication. They're taking antidepressants. They're the ones that have weight issues. They have to worry about gaining weight and trying to lose fat and exercising. And here I am doing my thing, going along on the heart attack diet, skinny as ever, active as ever. Haven't been to a doctor since 96.
Wow.
So I learned, you got to discover things for yourself. You may have to take a risk and go out on a limb, but sometimes you can actually be successful. That's what I learned.
You mentioned the advice. What would be one piece of advice to someone considering this diet? What would it be? What would you tell them?
I would recommend they try it because I even tried the plant-based diet myself back in 93.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're perfectly healthy and you don't have a problem, don't worry about it. But if you're, especially when you're older, because when people are young, they can eat garbage and they seem to be able to get away with it. And I've known a lot of people, like when I was in my 20s and they were in their 20s, they looked better than me. They had nice physique, they were the guys that the girls would run after. I'm the one they'd run away from. But six-pack abs, pecs, arms, everything. Then you got a toothpick like me. I got all the physique of a palm tree. And, but now you see them, it's like, what happened?
Yeah.
They look terrible. Their face is fat. Their body is crap. They're all kinds of injuries, back trouble, pulled muscles, bad joints, bad feet. It's just one thing after the other. And I don't have any of that. I can go about, I have the exact same physical capability that I did when I was 25. I can do the exact same work. No problem. They can't do it anymore. They ride in my truck and it's too bumpy and they're hurting and
Oh,
I don't even
wow.
feel it,
Wow.
and these are people that were in good shape when they're younger, but of
Right.
course they ate the pizza and the bread and they drank the beer, and one of my friends became an alcoholic because of that stupid beer. You know how it was with spring break, they go
Oh,
there
yeah.
and get drunk all the
Yep.
time and but I never did any of that. I was over there having my steak. They could over there and get drunk and I thought it was kind of stupid, Why would anybody want to be drunk and act dumb? I couldn't figure it out. But yeah, over time, I seem to have been proven to be, I don't know about right, but probably more right than most.
Oh, yes. That's why you're unique. I every time you tell your story or part of your story when I'm on a live with you and I hear different aspects of what you just shared, I am envious. I wish I had started this back when I was in the 1980s, in the 70s, when I was a teenager. How much healthier would I have been? Would I have grown taller than I am today? I call it bandwidth when we talk about our youth. We have such wide bandwidth. Our body can heal when we abuse it. And you're right. I look at my friends who are in their 50s and 60s now, as I approach 60, and they're not so good. They don't look so great. They're not in good shape. There's so many diseases. They're on so many medicines, and I'm not. And you're not. And our
I've
carnivore friends that we talk to are not.
I've never been on a prescription medication in my whole
That's
life.
phenomenal. That's unique beyond belief. All right. Do you have any favorite books or podcasts or other resources that inspired or helped you along the way?
Well, the only books I really read are manuals and how to do it kind of things. I have a collection of how to do it books I used to read when I was a kid, how to build things, how to repair things, whatever. Podcast, I don't really I don't have a cell phone with cell phone service, but what I
Mhm.
do, I take a laptop with me when I'm working, and then I have one of those plug-in FM transmitters, and I use these cheap FM radios. And then what I'll do, I'll put these things in my ear, I'll put the
Wireless.
radio with me. These are just AM FM.
Hmm.
I used to get these things like cheap at the dollar store or whatever. and I'll listen to a lot of different YouTubers, including your channel. And then when I get the chance, I get away from my work. I'll go over to the laptop. I'll type in some comments. So you'll see me pop up at various times of the day. I stopped watching regular TV in 2010. So really now it's just YouTube, and that's about it. I tend to go to the YouTube channels that I communicate with. I mean, I know a lot of people, they'll go to the Dr. Berry channel. I never watch that because you have so many people on there. You might have thousands of people. Every time I posted a comment, nobody ever answers it. I went there 2 times and that was it. I got away from it. I used to like to watch the Homestead How channel, but I don't watch it really anymore. It's become sort of a celebrity channel. You have hundreds of people in there and you just say hi, and unless you're Bill Knott or one of those people, they're not going to say hi to you. So I got
Hmm.
out of that one. And there's some good channels out there. There's yours. You have Nia's channel. You have DC, his channel. Um, Carnivore Muscle. There's certain channels out there. These are people that I know, although I haven't met them in person yet. I've been able to interact over the years, so I always catch their channels. And the big channels, Anthony Chafee's channel, I try to catch that whenever I can. I'm actually moderator in that channel, and I like him, so I follow him, and Barkay, and there's a couple of others. So usually, what it comes down to is when I have sort of a personal relationship with the channel, I'll follow it. But once that goes away, I just kind of, I move on. I let the groupies move in
The
because I try to look for the little channels,
little guys, yeah.
the little guys that just pop up, especially the younger ones that are new to carnivore, or the older ones. You also have old guy carnivore, the cigar
Yeah, yeah.
smoker. I I, I like him. And again, as a Floridian, I try to catch all the Florida channels because if I'm going to
Oh,
meet anyone,
okay.
it's most likely going to be one of us that I'm going to meet, because the chance of me traveling any distance at this point is very low. But maybe in the future, I don't know. But that's what I do, and that's pretty much all I do, because I don't watch TV. I watch the news, local news once a day, and that's it. I don't watch sports. I think sports are stupid. I know a lot of people, they go for the football and the basketball, and everyone thought I should play basketball because I'm tall, but
You're
I don't.
tall. That's the common question for the tall person. Do you play basketball?
Right. But I don't like sports. I really don't. I think it's a waste of time. Now again, if you're going to play a sport with your friends, I am up for that. When we have get-togethers, I played touch football and I played volleyball and all that stuff. And it really is kind of funny because you get these teenage and 20 somethings, and I can keep up with them and I can actually outdo some of them.
Wow.
That's the funny part.
Yeah.
And then you have the 50-year-olds like me. They usually do a little bit and then they go and have a beer or
Right.
have some duck food and relax. But I seem to have a lot of energy for a 56-year-old.
Absolutely. Now, anybody did not know your age and they met you in person, or online like this, I think they would not know that you were in your 50s because you
They
do
never
look
guess. They
extremely
always they always guess somewhere between
30.
39,
Yeah, 30
yeah,
something.
35 to like 40 something. The highest I've ever had, someone thought I was 48. That's the
Ah,
highest I've ever gotten. Because people ask that. Do you know how old Rick is? Because they had to say, how do you remember this? How do you remember that?
right.
I was talking about the Banana Splits TV show. They
Right.
said, I remember that, but you're not old enough to remember. I remember it. Oh, you can't be. You can't remember it. You're only like 40, right? I'm like, no, no.
Can you sing the song? Da, na,
La
na,
la
na,
la
na,
la
na.
la la
And they come down the
la.
sliding board.
One banana, two banana, three
Right,
banana,
right.
four.
Right after school, I used to come home and watch
See,
that. It's like
I
we're
even
about the
have a
same
six.
age.
I even have a six-wheeler, like the
Oh,
Banana
wow.
Split
Yeah, yeah,
show.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, same generation. So when you're talking about our generational stuff and they don't realize that you're as old as you are. Yeah,
Right.
interesting. All right, before we go, you are the duck man, the iguana man. Tell our audience about this if they have not seen or heard you much. Um, you mentioned to me that you corral them sometimes in your property and you fatten them up so that they're happy and relaxed and the meat tastes good when you eat. Tell me about that.
Well, I'm one of those kids that I always liked animals. My first pet was a cat, but as a kid, when I had food I didn't like, I would throw it outside. and we have a canal nearby. So the ducks, they roamed all around the neighborhood. And eventually they discovered my home. And what happened was when I would throw out the stuff I didn't like for breakfast, they would come and eat it. And I just got kind of used to them, and I used to like them. They're kind of funny looking. The Muscovy ducks we have here, they look like a cross between a vulture and a duck,
Let me
but
share with
they're
our audience here. I don't think we mentioned it. Rick lives in Miami, Florida, and you grew up there. Am I correct? You were
yes, I
born and
grew up
raised
here.
there. So when
Yes.
everything we're referring to, anybody from around the world might be watching this. Like, what's he talking about? Muscovy and yeah. So
My
Miami.
my neighbor my neighborhood is called Westwood Lakes and
Okay.
Horse Country, and there's a canal network that goes through this whole neighborhood. It's all connected together. When they built these houses, they did that. It goes to the Snapper Creek Canal, so if it would rain a lot, it wouldn't flood, because we have a combination of pine lands and swamp. So what they did, they made it so the neighborhood wouldn't flood. And then what happened was when the ducks got in there, they just went through the whole canal system, and they were breeding and they spread all over the place. And once in a while, the alligators would come and eat them up, or maybe the raccoons or whatever. Sometimes they even do that now. But there, you could always find ducks here, and you always had some lady that would feed them. And there was a duck lady down the street, so she had over 100 of them things in her yard.
Wow.
But they would go all over the neighborhood, and they'd lay their eggs. And we had one time the ducks lay eggs in the backyard, and I kept watching and watching. When the ducklings hatched, it was the cutest little thing. And I was like all the other kids. We watched Sesame Street. You had Ernie and Bert, and I think Ernie had his rubber ducky. They had the
Or
rubber ducky song. Rubber ducky, you're
Joey
the one.
one. Yeah.
You make it so much fun. And that was so when I saw the ducklings, I thought they were really cute. So I became sort of the protector of the ducks in the neighborhood. I'd try to rescue them from the drain and keep them from getting run over and feed them. Well, and they like to breed. So next thing you know, you have more and more ducks. And every morning they'd be there waiting when it's breakfast time because they knew they were going to get some oatmeal or some whole wheat crap. And sometimes if I was the summertime at lunchtime, granola, I give them granola. There was always something there. So I became sort of the duck man. And then over time, wherever I lived, I always had my own little flock of ducks. Eventually, my duck population it got to the extreme. It was over 100, and I think I had 110 ducks at one time.
Whoa.
It got really bad.
It's a lot of duck
My
poop.
Yeah, my neighbors were just losing it.
I bet. Yeah.
So it was like, I got to do something with these ducks. And I used to give them away to friends, but nobody wanted them anymore. There's too many ducks. So it's like, I had one of the big male ducks that was aggressive. He was killing the ducklings. So I caught him killing the ducklings, and I grabbed him by the neck, and basically, I didn't know what to do with him. So I finally I just cut his head off. I was like, that's it. So I had this duck. I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Bury him? And I'm looking at him thinking, I've had chicken, I've had turkey. It's a big bird. Maybe I can cook him. So that's when I did my first duck. I've plucked chickens before, but I'd never done a duck before. And then once I did that, and I was able to see what kind of meat he had and how big he was, and I fried him like I fry heart attack chicken. It was so good. It was like a steak.
Hmm.
I was like, wow, this is great. And they used to tell me they were not edible. Said those ducks are nasty. They're full of parasites and they're whatever. No, the meat was good. It was flavorful.
Hmm.
I thought, wow, this is great. So I looked at my duck problem in a whole different way. And I started cooking. And I reduced my duck population from over 100 to less than 30. And then things went back to normal. So I got to the point where it didn't matter how many ducks I got. If they started breeding, sometimes I would do a duck removal. People actually pay to have the ducks killed. But what I do, I charge them to remove the ducks. And instead of killing them on the spot, I put them in cages. I load them in my car or truck. I take them to my house and I let them loose. They usually stay around.
Mm-hmm.
And then I weed out the good ones from the bad ones. The most aggressive ducks, they're the first in the kitchen. So I take care of that problem in the best way possible. And I did it, and to this day, if I get too many ducks or I have access to them, I will cook them up. And every one I've cooked has been delicious. Now, the iguana situation, We had iguanas here in the 80s, but they were not that common. They were still kind of exotic. But in the early 2000s, they just started to multiply.
Yeah.
And by, I would say, 2008 or 9, we were overrun with the things. There was iguanas all over this neighborhood, and they were just taking over. And then one of my friends, he was shooting them to try to control the population. And when he was throwing it away, I thought, I see this big old lizard. I'm thinking, I've had rattlesnake before, and I've had, various other pieces of seafood. Thought, I wonder what a lizard would taste like. So I cut it up. I cut the legs off. I cut the tail off, and I boiled it up. And I took a taste of the meat, and I go, wow, this isn't bad. And then I tried frying it, and I tried all these different ways of cooking it. It was really good. And ever since then, I've been an iguana man. If I can find a big fat iguana that's ready for the taking, I'll get it and I'll cook it up, and I'll have delicious iguana meat. I developed a real taste for it. And to this day, I love iguana.
So your grocery bill is probably a lot less than everybody else's.
Well, it is, especially, when the iguanas are numerous. But
I
the
mean, not
problem
just
is,
because you're a carnivore, but because you capture your food like the way we
yes.
used to hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, and the thing is that I exhausted the supply in my neighborhood, so I have to go a little bit further away to get some more of them. But some neighborhoods are so overrun with iguanas, like in
Wow.
the more wealthy neighborhoods,
Mhm.
because nobody eats them.
Right.
And they're just everywhere. They're digging holes all over the place. They poop everywhere. They're getting
Now,
in people's
yeah, in
pools.
my neighborhood, in the park where I live, I see certain times of the year they're more prevalent than others, especially when they're sunning themselves because they have to get warm because it's cooler out. Like this time of year, do the bigger ones taste different than the smaller ones? I see some really big ones, and I also see some really small ones. I mean, are there certain sizes you capture that you prefer the meat?
I don't waste my time with the little ones because there's not a lot of meat.
Not
I'd
much.
rather let them grow. So
Okay.
I like to wait until they get 3 feet or bigger, ideally.
All right. One last question: how do you capture an iguana?
It depends. I mean, most of the time, what I'll do, I'll shoot them on the spot with a crossbow. So
A
I'll go
bow.
out there with a crossbow and then try to shoot them in the head. If you get them just right, they won't be able to move. But if they're near the canal, a lot of times they'll run away. So what I did, I rigged up my own crossbow bow hunting setup. Like when you go bow fishing, like the rednecks do, you got a reel on there, and then you have the fishing line. So when you shoot them, you have the bolt that goes right into them. It's got a little grasper on it, and then if they try to swim away, you can hold it back. So when they get in the water, you can reel them in.
Wow.
So I've done that. Also, you can use a catch pole, which is a long pole, and it has a noose on the end of it. And if it's like in the wintertime when they're not really doing much, like this time of the year,
Mhm.
you can come up from them from the back and then put it over their head, and then you pull that and you get them by the head. And then you can get them in a bag, and then you can take them home and get them whenever you want.
Fascinating. Because I live, as you know, as our audience may not know, I live maybe about an hour north of you. I'm in Boca
Hmm.
Raton. So I see the iguanas, I see the Muscovy ducks and the Egyptian geese all over the place. And nowadays, I think of you all the time, Rick, whenever I walk and I see them. This
Good
has
eating.
been fantastic. I want to thank you so much for agreeing to be my very first interview. Hopefully, we'll have many, and you will be known as number one, as you have been for, I think, Dave Mack, right? And a few
Yes.
others. I'm
Yes.
honored, Rick. Thank you so much. Tell our audience where they can find you.
You can find me on YouTube. My channel name is Charger Mopar, which is named after my favorite car, 69 Dodge Charger. And I've done a lot of videos. I've been on a lot of interviews. You can find me on all the best carnivore YouTube channels as a guest or as an interview. So I'm not hard to find.
All right, great. And I want to thank you, and I'll see you in the future.
Yes.
All right.